Page 401. And if you follow the teaching, the quote, Goblet of the Truth, the quote, teaching of the prophets, and if you learn everything which it imparts you, then you shall not simply accept everything as given, but rather use it in order to fathom it out, and to work it out in yourselves, so that you may find the real truth out of and in everything, and become knowing and wise in yourselves, by understanding and following the truth that you have found in yourselves. Consider also, you human beings of earth, only what you have created in yourselves through hard working out and truth finding, through the explanations and guidance of the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, and all that which you perceive in the free nature all around, in all things and life forms, and recognize as effects of the creational laws and recommendations, can you find in yourselves as effective truth if you consciously and honestly strive to do so. Therefore it is a fact that no one can answer the question about the truthly truth for you themselves, not even the true prophets, because these can only guide you in the explanations of the truth, as well as the modes of functioning of the creational laws and recommendations, whereas you can only find the truth for this in yourselves if you think through everything neutrally in yourselves and find the result of the truth therein. But consider, when you want to find the truth in yourselves, and this is the only way to the truthly truth, then you shall not be immature in yourselves, and you must therefore know yourselves, so that you can understand yourselves, which in turn must be obtained through self-cognition. If, therefore, you turn to the quote, teaching of the prophets, then you do not need to search for any kind of quote, higher things, or for quote, redemption, or for any other thing based in irrational teachings, but solely and exclusively learn out of the teaching only those things which lead you to the self-cognition and to your own self, and to all those characterly and virtuous values through which you can raise yourselves up to the being human in the real and true sense. And it is only once you have acquired certain values in this regard, and have found your own self, that you shall turn to those things of the teaching through which you make valueful perceptions and deeper cognitions and cognizances, as well as win deeper knowledge and practical experience, which you feel as living experience and can use as wisdom. And if you ask yourselves what your self is, then you must fathom your inner nature and its individuality in order to be able to observe that there is a great difference between this individuality, i.e., the character of your inner nature, and you human beings as such, i.e., as individuums. You human beings, as individuums, with your own will and your own decisions, are more or less free, not bound to one place, and you can be anywhere you like and love, such as in a place, in a country, or you can belong to a quite distinct society, culture, and religion, can dedicate yourself to your activity, and use everything which is of material kind, and in this wise determines your life as a human being. However, your individuality is bound as character in your nature as a local oneness, and gives expression of itself with its especialness, peculiarities, as well as with the character, the virtues, and with the personality, etc. And your deeds as an individuum, as a human being, are only partly related to the whole and broad life area, which not only includes the human being as an individuum with his or her free choice of the dwelling, society, culture, and religion, or his or her mode of thinking, but also the individual, which has inherent in itself the especialness, character, virtues, and personality, and, of course, also the human and the being human in the real and true sense. What arises out of this is that individuum and individuality are two fundamentally different values, which are often confounded with each other and wrongly explained by you human beings of Earth. Therefore, in this connection, it is always necessary to take the whole into account. Therefore, it is not possible to speak of only one part, because in truth, it is always a matter of the completeness of you human beings, namely the individuum and the individuality, which are decisive with regard to the being human in the real and true sense. And because only the completeness of individuum and individuality is important, out of this it also follows that both parts are of equal importance and of equal value. Therefore, there is no smaller and larger part, and therefore it is wrong to teach that a smaller and a larger part arise with regard to the individuality and the individuum, meaning that the larger cannot be found in the smaller, and the smaller cannot be found in the larger, because, truthfully, both parts of the wholeness, individuum and individuality, are of equal value, just as the one part draws benefit from the other. Therefore it is necessary to remember always to talk about the whole and not about a part, and that the same values are found in both parts, but are simply of a different kind in their form, namely as material and intrinsic, i.e., as individuum-based and individual. As individuum, you human beings of Earth are constrained creatures who bring misery on yourselves, and are disappointed as well as still powerless with regard to the consciousness, and of little significant importance, who satisfy yourselves with your false religious belief, and your invented little gods and tin gods and images, and live according to your old, confused, and irrational traditions. Whereas you could, however, live as true human beings if you built up your inner nature, your individuality, in a truthfully wise, according to the creational laws and recommendations, and would transfer this to your entire life in yourselves and outside of yourselves. In doing so, you would then also be true human beings in humaneness, in which you would participate in the well-being, in all affliction, in the misery and confusion of your entire earthly humankind. But truly, you human beings of Earth, you have remained captives of yourselves and of your traditions for many thousands and even millions of years. Traditions which you have learned and followed through lies and deceptions of your fellow human beings, who invented gods and tin gods, and more of the same with fantasy, or with a confused consciousness. And you have accepted these gods and tin gods, and have since then worshipped them, and begged them for help. However, they can never give you anything, because they are only imaginary and powerless figures of fantasy. And false duties have been imposed upon you through the inventors of the fantasy forms, God and tin god, and false prophets have given false teachings, as well as false requirements of the supposed gods and tin gods, the fulfillment of which has been imposed upon you as a duty, out of which, however, only terribleness arose, which came entirely upon your whole humankind, in the form of greed and envy, jealousy, hatred, anxiety, fear and despair, aggression, pathological craving for revenge, lustfulness, pathological craving for retaliation, which has, through getting very badly out of the control of the good human nature, entirely turned into war, terror, pathological craving for might, as well as religious fanaticism, and into the religious belief delusion, from which there is no rescue. Sometimes, however, you also feel joy, love, and inclination in yourselves, but you are also doubtful in this, and therefore an exceedingly peculiar mixture of love and hatred, of jealousy and inclination, of forbearance and unforbearance, of honesty and unhonesty, as well as of kind-heartedness and evil, also of pathological craving for revenge and reconciliation, of peaceableness and peacelessness, and of acting with Gewalt and charity, etc. Truly, as far as technology is concerned, you human beings of Earth have made great progress, from the club to the atom bomb, and from the wheelless cart to space rockets. You have pushed ahead with your progress, but in your inner nature, in your individuality, you have not developed greatly as an individuum, as a human being, but have negatively changed yourselves even further, by means of which you have created the entire unhonest structure of the society throughout the world. When you look at and consider the external social structure, then you see the result of your inner psychological structure, as is given in your inner nature, i.e., in your individuality, which you carry in you as an individuum, as a human being, as the expression of your attitude, because as an individuum, you use the result of the entire practical experiences, of the entire knowledge, and of all things in order to form your individual, i.e., natural behavior, as you have done already since time immemorial, which is why you carry therewith the entire past in your inner nature, i.e., in your individuality. You as human beings, as individuums, are the expression which carries your entire humankind in it as individuality, as an inner nature, because it is in the inner nature, in the individuality, that everything has been formed since time immemorial, and namely the entire sorrowful and inadequate evolution history, through the wrong use of the consciousness and of the thoughts and feelings, through which the inner nature, the individuality, has been impaired and deformed, and this is transferred to the outside as well, to you human beings as individuums. Pay attention to what is happening in yourselves, in your inner nature, i.e., in your individuality, as well as what you as a human being, individuum, are doing outwardly, and what is generally taking place in your outer world in which you live, and which is a culture of competition without parallel, which only demands might, possessions and riches, pleasure, influence, position, rank, and name, as well as prestige, and everything that stands somehow or other in material connection. And look at and consider everything of which you are proud, and which you vehemently fight for. Look at and consider, however, also your relationships that you lead, which are full of conflicts and jealousy, as well as full of hatred, ausgeartet passion, and fanaticism, out of which brutality results, as well as strife, terror, murder, and manslaughter and war. Truly, that is your life, human beings of Earth, as you have known it since time immemorial, because you do not understand the truth of the creational laws and recommendations, and you are incapable of truly understanding and controlling the gigantic struggle of the life. Truly, hatred and strife, jealousy, greed for might, belief and worshipping gods, brutality, murder and manslaughter, endless wars and other terror as well as torture, missing interhuman relationships, greed, vice, and all kinds of pathological cravings are things which you undertake to an excessive extent, and this extensive domain of the evil and Ausartung is everything that you know. Naturally, you are afraid of all this, and you search for hidden possibilities to escape all these terrible things. but you do not succeed, because you only turn to your material life and to all its things, and however, not to the truthly truth of all truth, which is only to be found in the creational laws and recommendations, but which is unknown to you, however. Therefore, you are afraid of the unknown, of the life and of the death, and of everything that lies behind the next morning and in the near and far future. But you are also afraid of what is known to you, which the present existence brings you, and that is truly your life, in which there is no confidence for you, if you do not finally bethink yourselves in order to turn to the truthly truth of all truth, as is taught to you through the creational laws and recommendations, explained through the true prophets in the book, quote, Goblet of the Truth, the quote, teaching of the prophets, the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life. Human beings of earth, consider the truthly truth of all truth and learn it, so that you recognize that all religions and all their terms of any kind, as well as all philosophies, ideologies, and all forms of the religious belief in gods and tin gods, as well as their like, are nothing more than a cowardly flight from the true reality, and therefore from that which is truthly and uncontrovertible. And through the cowardly flight from the real truth and the effective reality, which are pre-given through the creational laws and recommendations, you have brought wars and all kinds of terribleness over your world and humankind. You have created vast changes in your world and in your humankind since time immemorial and up into the present time, although the majority of all these upheavals have been and are also in the present time of an extremely negative and evil nature, and indeed through your hatred that you bear towards your fellow human beings, because you do not like their nose, their religion, or their strangeness, or whatever else, through which you see yourselves incited to practice jealousy, take the first opportunity to wage wars and other terror, start reformations, revolutions, and bloody demonstrations and riots. And you create ideologies, religions, sects, laws, regulations, and ordinances which are unworthy of you human beings, and which unavoidably lead to confusion and wars, because they are laws, regulations, and ordinances which take from you human beings the dignity, peace, freedom, and harmony in every wise, and only bring forth more and more terrible things amongst you, instead of them being able to change you as individuals, and as a whole society, fundamentally to the better. As human beings which you are, you live in a monstrous world that you have created with ugly laws, ordinances, and regulations, etc., that are directed towards a society of the brutality, of the anxiety and fear, of the terror, of the acts of Gewalt, and of the unhonest competition. And this monstrous world, with you as humankind, cannot come to rest, and cannot become a world of love, peace, and harmony, as well as of true freedom. For as long as you do not form everything amply to the good, and according to the creational laws and recommendations, and indeed not only as an imagination and as a hope, but in truth and reality. And only if you change yourselves in truth and reality to the good and better, and thereby your consciousness awakes to a new freshness, reforms itself and becomes pure, will it be possible for you to bring forth an entirely different and valueful world in which you then live in a true paradise, and you feel well, and you are filled with love, and are also surrounded by it, as also peace, freedom, and harmony will prevail in and outside you. However, this can only happen if every single one of you human beings of Earth, as a single individuum, becomes conscious of the important fact and act according to it, namely, that you are yourselves as fully all around responsible as individuals for the entire status of your own inner nature, i.e., your individuality, as well as for the evolution of your consciousness, and with regard to your actions and efforts, as each individual of you is also fully and completely responsible for the status of the world in its entirety, irrespective of where you may live, and to which social class, religion or sect, which people, which culture, which philosophy or ideology you belong to as individuals. Be clearly conscious, even if you vehemently deny it, and believe that you are not guilty, that every single one of you is responsible for each war and each act of terror, and for each other act of Gewalt. Indeed, even if you do not advocate it, and you are guilty of it because you do not do anything against it, and you do not oppose it in any reasonable and logical wise, in Gewaltlosigkeit, you are only innocent of the whole thing if you do whatever is possible for you to take measures against all the terrible things, the wars, the terror, and the acts of Gewalt, whether through spoken words, through speeches and lectures, or through the script. Because if you do this, then do it according to law and right within the frame of the creational laws and recommendations to which each war and other terror and all acts of Gewalt stand in contradiction. Human beings of Earth, you are full of aggressivity, and are not connected to humankind, but rather you are nationalistic and racialistic, as well as full of selfishness, full of conceit, ideals, and prejudices, and you have your titles and your riches, as well as your gods and tin gods, and human idols, and your belief in them. Therefore you adore them, worship them, and make entreaties to them, and all this separates you from one another. Truly, you must clearly recognize, and indeed through intellect and rationality, that you are yourselves responsible for all the terrible things surrounding you, and for the entire chaos in you and in your world, for all the affliction, and for all the misery in yourselves as well as in the entire world. And you yourselves contribute to making everything even worse, because you do not restrict your offspring, but rather continue to reproduce irresponsibly, through which all terrible things, the misery and the affliction, as well as the gigantic catastrophes, also continue to multiply in the world and in its nature, as do also the hatred, the jealousy, the wars, the terror, the acts of Gewalt and crimes, etc., amongst you.